Live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at Broadcasting Live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. Be sure to check out our website for contests, bringing you the biggest names in technology, live video stream, podcasts, and more. And you're listening to Listen Live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there.
You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running and nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. We apologize for the mess up there, but everyone, hey, welcome into the program. So today on the show, we have none other than BrainHQ, Positive Science, and hey, everyone, we are going to be joined here in just a moment. So with that being said, yeah, and actually, I see them waiting oh so patiently in the room. So everyone, we'll get to our guests in just a moment, but before we do that, everyone, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including the show notes. We'll have everything from a link to our guest website, any articles, anything that we reference will be available in the show notes as well after the program. And while you're there, be sure to check out some of the recent articles. We have new reviews up and more. And hey, coming up in the next couple of weeks, we will have, of course, in early January, CES will be happening out in Vegas. And that's going to be a big deal for us because Computer America will be there and we will be checking out all the different companies, lining up a lot of very interesting interviews and more. So everyone, of course, hey, you can check that out. You can check all that and more, computeramerica.com. So with that being said, everyone, again, today's guest is none other than BrainHQ. If you haven't heard about them, well, hey, this is going to be the perfect show for you because we're going to learn all about what they do, how they do it, and we have the CEO of the company here of Positive Science to tell us, hey, how it all works. So everyone, let's go ahead and bring on our guest, and we'll just have fun with it. So everyone, once again, Dr. Henry, wait, I got this. Here we go. Dr. Henry Mahncke. Hopefully I said that right. And will be joining us and right now. So, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here on Computer America. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I apologize for jumping over that, but yeah, I'm happy that you could join us. You sound great and everything looks good. So for those of us watching the video portion, we're going to have your website up. We're going to be poking around, but for everyone else, strictly radio. So let's keep it nice and simple, but why don't we go ahead and get a little bit of background on BrainHQ, Positive Science, how do the two relate? I believe one is a product of the other, and a little bit of your background. What have you always been interested in making, like a tech service like this, or is this new territory for you?
Oh, wow, that's a lot. So yeah, let's dive in. So thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. So, me, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I did a PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco back in the day. And I had the good fortune to work on the topic of brain plasticity, which is the basic idea that the brain can rewire itself. It can change structurally, functionally, and chemically through learning and experience. And at the time I was doing my PhD, that was kind of a new idea. People thought that the brain was maybe more like a computer chip inside your head. It had a bunch of wires that conducted electricity, and that's how information processing worked. And the bad news about that is if your brain got whacked on the head or you got old, then the wires were broken and there wasn't much to be done about it. Mm-hmm. But the lab I was in and the general revolution that happened in neuroscience in the 90s taught us that that's not at all how the brain works. It's constantly rewiring and reorganizing itself over time. And my PhD advisor, a guy named Dr. Michael Mahncke, really was the researcher who discovered the idea of adult brain plasticity. And he called me up one day after I had finished my degree and said, Henry, we've spent a lot of time helping rats and we've spent a lot of time helping monkeys get better brains. It's probably about time to help some people get better brains. And that's what led to he and his co-founder founding Posit Science, and what led to me joining it. With that basic idea that we could take the science of brain plasticity out of the lab and into the world, and build scientifically based and clinically proven exercises that could help people have sharper brains.
Yeah, and that's a that's a very interesting background. I don't think I've ever heard of. Well, I don't think I've ever heard of. And I admit I'm not very well versed in this, but the people doing the research actually going out and saying, okay, we have something that we have researched and we understand very well, or better than anyone else, and we are the ones who are going to take it to the masses. Instead of a company or selling the idea to someone else. Did you have any experience, kind of outside of the research lab, or of course you said you're a neuroscientist. I mean, is this new territory for you? Being CEO?
That's certainly new territory. It's true that my own background, after I finished my degree, I went on and I worked at McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm, and a couple of years of work with them, where I was working mainly with pharmaceutical and medical device companies, and we were helping them with everything from R&D strategy to marketing strategy to M&A and that kind of thing. And also, when I was at McKinsey, I've had a lifelong love of video games. And so when I was at the firm, I did the firm's first work with video game clients, working out of the LA office, which traditionally served, music and movies, but video games was turning into big business.
Yeah.
So at the end of that time, I had gained enough experience in healthcare and enough experience with video games that I wasn't quite sure what my career meant. So when the opportunity came to say, hey, let's take this basic science of brain plasticity and let's wrap it into engaging and compelling game-like experiences so people can improve their brain function, all of a sudden everything I'd been working on came together and made sense for the first time ever. So that was kind of fun.
It's a very interesting crossroads you found yourself at, and I'm glad that you found something that really intersected just so neatly. And for anyone out there, of course, watch the video portion. We're showing the website, but brainhq.com. You can, of course, check that out. We'll have a link to it in the show notes after the program. But when you get here, obviously a very introductory video. But why don't we go ahead and get a little bit of background for your, from you with brain training and brain training that works. I'm not going to kind of lie to you, say that we've never had a company on that's done this before, and I'm sure that they were offshoots or maybe even of BrainHQ, but it's something that I've heard about for a couple of years. We actually, former host of Computer America, Craig Crossman, he unfortunately had a stroke a couple of years ago, and one of the doctors, and thank you, but one of the doctor's recommendations for his rehab was to actually sign up for BrainHQ and some of these other services to just have something else in his day-to-day that that everything you were talking about. I guess his doctor really wanted him to have his brain rewired, because after such trauma, it's very, very crazy. And I'm sure that, later on in the interview, we're going to talk about how this can help people recover, and how this can help people who don't have any kind of injury, but just want to keep their brain nice and squishy, or whatever the proper adjective for a good brain is. This can be very good. But for you, Doctor, I wanted to, kind of ask you, who do you see as your primary audience for BrainHQ?
Well, our notion of that has really grown and changed over the years. When we started the company, what did we know we could do? We knew that we could take essentially any brain and make it faster and more accurate. And that's what the experiments at the university had taught us, and that's what we were trying to take out into the world. And we figured that by making a brain faster and more accurate, we would improve cognitive function, things like memory and attention. And we would also figure we would improve real world function, because everything we do in the world, whether it's driving or talking or remembering things that we're supposed to get at the store, that all depends upon having a fast, accurate brain. So, having coming out of a little consulting background, we did a little back of the envelope math, by which I mean we made tons of spreadsheets. And hey, unsurprisingly, one of the things we came to recognize is that fundamentally, well, all of us are getting older. And as all of us get older, our brains start to slow down and get less accurate. And what that meant is that when we got the company going, we figured our first market should be, well, let's help everyone who's aging have a faster and sharper brain. And that seemed like that would be a pretty good opportunity. And it figured that we would help do justice to the science by fundamentally trying to help everyone. And what was interesting about that is that, we ran our first large-scale randomized controlled trials.
Hmm.
And we wanted to do that because, unlike a lot of other brain game companies, we wanted to build a program that was not only scientifically sensible, but we wanted to build something that was really shown to work, the way you'd see a new drug or a new medical device get tested. And when we ran those first large-scale trials, and the first one we did, for example, was with Mayo Clinic and the University of Southern California, we ran those in people who were 65 and older, because we figured, okay, by the time you get to 65 or 70 or 75, most people are really starting to notice that they're slowing down.
Hmm.
So for this clinical trial, let's work with people who've had that experience and have some real room to improve. And that trial worked out fantastic. We showed that we could improve people's memory by about 10 years, and that these improvements were big enough to notice in real life. And that was the first trial that had actually ever been done of a commercially available brain training program that had shown that one worked. So that was very exciting. And we started to experience a lot of growth and success on that basis.
Right.
But what always became, what we had in the back of our mind was, well, gosh, that's great, but we probably could help a broader set of people. And inside the company here, we're always testing these exercises out. And it's pretty obvious that even inside the company, where we have lots of young or middle-aged people who are all pretty sharp, that nonetheless there was still a lot of variance on the performance of these exercises. Right? Someone might be better than someone else, and that always kind of left us scratching our heads, saying, "Well, gosh, we probably could help anyone who's low performing get sharper." And what happened that really broadened our perspective on this is that a couple of years ago, we got one of the most amazing and odd phone calls I'd ever gotten, which is that we had Alex Guerrero, who's the personal trainer for Tom Brady of the New England Patriots, call us up and say, "Hey, did you guys know that Tom Brady's been using BrainHQ?" And we looked it around and we said, no, as a matter of fact, we did not know that. It was a huge surprise. And to make a long story short, we ended up flying out to Foxborough, meeting with Tom Brady and his personal brain imaging team, which was kind of wild to find out that he had such a thing. And what he ended up telling us was that, hey, he was using these exercises to get a sharper and faster brain, not because he was slow and inaccurate, because in fact he was pretty sharp and fast already. But of course, in order to win Super Bowls, he wanted to not be at the 95th percentile, but the 99.9th percentile. And that really opened our way of thinking to say that, hey, fundamentally what the science here lets us do is it doesn't just let us help older people improve their cognitive function, probably helps just about everyone get sharper and faster. And the same way we think about physical exercise probably being helpful for everyone, just about all of us get benefit from physical exercise, even if we're in pretty good shape. The right form of brain exercise probably helps just about all of us maintain great cognitive function, no matter kind of where we start.
So that, and you really just probably already answered the question that I had in the back of my head, which is, I'm sure that you've met people, and I'm wondering if it makes you, kind of want to scream that I've met people that like, oh, I'm always bad at remembering faces. I'm always bad at remembering phone numbers. I'm always bad at, I have slow reaction speed. Like these things that people just kind of take for granted that they are innately bad at, and they turn that into kind of like a personality quirk. So you're saying that these things that, let's say someone is always bad at remembering names, that maybe a symptom that somewhere in BrainHQ there is a training regimen that will help them, maybe not specifically with that, but maybe in other areas, or maybe specifically with that. Is that maybe a symptom that or a way that you can say that, oh, we could probably help that person?
You're absolutely right. It does in fact drive me crazy when people tell me this, because I think it is still far too common that people have this very fixed concept of what their brain can or cannot do. People come and they say, oh, I'm really bad at names and faces. Or people say, oh, I'm just really, I've just never been good at math. I don't have
Or
a
directions,
math.
yeah.
Right. Or that's a great one, right? I've never been good at keeping track of directions. And I'm sure that's true, right? There's some people who are great at directions and some people are bad at them. But it's not because your brain is sort of permanently wired that way. It's not because your genetic code says the only kind of brain that you'll ever have is a brain that's bad at directions. It's because you have a lived life experience where, for whatever reasons of your own experience and history, you haven't found it enjoying and compelling to work on improving your sense of direction, for example, where you just maybe haven't had a lot of opportunity to do that. Maybe there was always someone else who could help. And so your brain just, didn't build itself that way. Your brain built itself in other ways. But of course, we know from brain plasticity that brains can rewire themselves. And that there really almost isn't anyone on the planet who couldn't sharpen a cognitive skill like that in a direction they wanted to, with the right, with the right set of training exercises, the right life experience, and most importantly, the right desire. And so I think, the more you sit back and think about that, the more mind-blowing an idea that is, that in fact, our brains are always rewiring themselves in response to what we ask them to do. If we sit around on the couch all day and watch SpongeBob, we'll get a brain that's kind of optimized for watching SpongeBob.
Yeah.
I love SpongeBob. Don't take that as a criticism, but our brains end up reflecting what we ask to do with them. And so if you're a person who feels like you're always struggling with directions and you genuinely want to improve, well then, hey, in a step-by-step and organized way, there's absolutely ways to rewire your brain to be better at those kinds of things.
And I apologize for the brief moment of silence, because on the video portion, I'm actually checking out. You have one of the exercises. I saw a bunch of flashing butterflies, and they circled one, and then I of course had to pay attention to the show, so people can actually go out and try these. and you would say that these exercises, you mentioned way back when that you were a fan of video games. What that means. There's so many different kinds of video games, but I'm sure that led to essentially this idea that you can gamify training your brain. And I think that's the point, is that, working out your body, there are ways that you can, kind of make it fun. You can play sports and do that kind of thing. And I think that's the part where with brains that I think a lot of people think of, training your brain or doing these exercises might involve some kind of, memorize these patterns as best you can, and then you're going to get it wrong, but maybe over time, hey, you're going to get it right. I'm not sure, we're going to talk about a study about power line workers here that might shed some light on this, but I wouldn't think that a training regimen that is strictly by the numbers, probably going to work, but is not engaging whatsoever, was not the way that you wanted to go with this.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. The science of what we're doing in terms of speeding up the brain and making it more accurate, there's a lot of ways one might go about that. But we wanted to make these exercises engaging and compelling because in order to change how the brain is wired, a person does have to do it, and they have to do it with some degree of regularity over some period of time. And, there's ways to make these exercises in a laboratory environment where, no one would want to do it at all unless they were part of a science experiment. And then there's ways to build them where you're involving game designers and artists and people from that background to turn them into something that, hey, that's pretty engaging and compelling. Now, it is always going to be work, right? It's like physical exercise. It is always going to be work, but we can turn that work into something that's engaging and compelling and fun to do rather than just a chore. And in doing so, of course, we can get a lot more people to do it and make a lot more progress.
I completely understand that, and of course, getting people to come back. And I think I read somewhere on the website, but I want you to reiterate. How long does this take? I mean, if people have to set aside 30 minutes a day, that's going to be a much harder sell for people to, like, even though you're promising them a better brain, a better foundation for the self. That's I feel like that's not enough to really get people to, do something good for themselves. How long would you say a session takes, and how long over time would you say people start to notice a difference in, whatever it is that they may be training?
Yeah, in many ways, it's remarkable how little time it takes to change a brain. And let me start with a real world example, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My daughter, we live in San Francisco, and when my daughter was 10 years old, she learned how to ride a bike. We learn a little late in San Francisco because it's kind of a hilly territory. And so, we went out and she did all the things you learn to ride a bike. And, after about 10 hours of training over the course of, 8 or 10 days, over the course of a few weeks, she knew how to ride a bike. Now, what happened in her brain? Well, her brain had to deeply reorganize itself, right? Her brain had to, figure out pedals and learn how to react to how the sense of balance was affecting how she should move, and
Hmm.
had to do this kind of unnatural steering and so forth and so on. But after 10 hours of training, her brain had reorganized to do that. Now, that's kind of amazing because 10 hours of training isn't that much, but it was
Right.
enough to reorganize her brain in that way. And it turns out that this kind of learning, which a psychologist would call procedural learning or non-declarative memory, it turns out it really works like that. And what's also remarkable is it lasts a long time. If she didn't ride a bike for the next 6 months or a year, and then she got back on, she might not be quite as good as she was, but she'd still know how to ride a bike. And that's because that kind of learning drives these very long-lasting changes in the brain. And what our studies with universities show is very much the same thing. We show that with about 10 hours in some studies to as many as 40 hours of training in other studies, typically done over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 months, that we're driving long-lasting changes in the brain that lead to reliable improvements in cognitive function that can be measured with standard instruments. And so it's definitely a commitment, right?
Yeah.
Just like physical exercise, you're not going to lose weight and gain strength and improve your cholesterol if you just take a walk in the park once a week and kind of are casual about it. It's going to take a bit more than that. But at the same time, it's not an impossible amount, right? You don't have to rewire your entire life. You don't have to stop your job and so forth and so on. It's something that just about anyone can kind of bake into their weekly routine because they care about and want to maintain their brain fitness, just the way people make time for physical exercise to maintain their physical fitness.
So, and I think something that will really, that will really help to define that is, and this is something here that I'm a little shaky on, but just from context clues here, power line worker study. And what was the study? And of course, you mentioned, that you had your double blind, your double blind trials in recently, and you saw great success, and you saw actual improvement. Was this related to that, or a completely different study? What was this? What was this work related study?
This was kind of a really interesting development. Like I said, we and our collaborators had done a lot of kind of classic randomized controlled studies in academic environments showing that we can improve kind of classic measures of cognitive function. And as that data started to go out into the world, we started to get more and more people approaching us to say, well, look, do you think that improving brain function would help, this kind of person in this other kind of setting? And of course, we love science, so we said yes to all those studies. We gave these researchers BrainHQ and said, hey, do these studies, come back and tell us what you learn. So the Powerline study was a really interesting example of that. It was run by Jim Walters, who is a researcher who had a lot of experience himself, both working in the Powerline industry and then working particularly around safety. And how do we do safety training for people who are Powerline workers? And, what you should be imagining here is perhaps you already are, is, these are people who are, climbing up Powerline poles. They're, 30, 40, 50 feet in the air. They're doing extremely detailed, careful, technical work at the top of these poles laying in new equipment, fixing things that are broken. And, it is a challenging and dangerous job without a question. And it's a job where, hey, if you make a mistake because your attention wanders or you forget exactly is the red wire supposed to connect to the green post or the black post, maybe you've done $1 million worth of damage to a power system, and maybe you've done something even worse to yourself. So what Jim Walters asked was, well, would BrainHQ training, would the training in these exercises
Mm-hmm.
help improve the safety of these workers? And the way he asked it is he took a bunch of these power line workers, again, just regular working age people who were in this line of work, and randomized them into two groups. And half of them did the BrainHQ exercises, and the other half of them didn't. And the BrainHQ exercises were focused on improving cognitive speed and attention. And then he did two things, which is, first of all, he looked at their cognitive performance afterwards on a measure called a sustained attention task. And this is a task where you have to pay attention to a stimulus appearing on a computer screen for quite a long period of time. And you have to keep responding every time you see the stimulus. But in a few cases, you have to not respond. You have to withhold your response. And it sounds like a very easy task, but when you do it for quite some time, you know what happens? Your attention wanders and eventually you make some mistakes. And that's, of course, exactly what they're trying to not have happen if you're a power line worker doing this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
And what the study showed was that the folks who went through the BrainHQ training substantially improved their performance on this sustained attention task, which meant that by rewiring their brain with the exercises, we had improved their ability to pay sustained attention to these kinds of tasks. So that was cool at first because it's always nice to see that this kind of brain training improves cognitive performance. But where the study got really interesting was the follow-up period. And what Jim Walters had the opportunity to do was over the next year or so, after folks were done with the training, he was able to work with their employers to pull their safety records and sort out, well, how many on-the-job accidents did they have, even well after they were done with training? And what he found out was that folks who did not do the training were actually 9 times more likely to have an on-the-job accident after they had finished training. And what that suggested was that, hey, by improving their cognitive speed and accuracy, which was then seen on this sustained attention task, that was helping improve their real-world job performance in a way that directly contributed to their job safety. So that's a pretty cool result.
Yeah, no,
Something like this.
That's certainly very cool, and just to kind of roll that into other things that we've seen from really large organizations, and I'm not sure what the current corporate culture is, but I've heard of at least in a corporate setting that they have decided to kind of help their employees by either introducing preventive, I was supposed to say preventive maintenance like they're a car, but essentially preventative measures like, yoga, being an acceptable lunch break or something like, or, being an acceptable break. They will incentivize their employees to become more fit, by handing out fitness trackers and seeing if they could meet a certain, step goal or lose a certain amount of weight. There are things that corporations are willing to do because they know that the immediate short term, they're going to lose money. People are going to have to take time away from work that, that they would rather them be doing. But they know that over the long period, it improves productivity. The employees feel better. They have better satisfaction at work. So many of these different things. Are you suggesting that maybe, what BrainHQ does, that would be something along the same lines that, just like improving the physical, just like improving mindfulness, this is something that's, on a larger scale, you will definitely see a return over time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right way to think about it. And from a workplace training perspective, you can sort of see this shift from, okay, we need to train people to do exactly what their jobs are, right? I'm operating a drill press. I need to be trained on exactly what the operations of the drill press are and how to operate it safely. And of course, that's great. You absolutely need to do that. But the shift we're seeing, as you call out over the past, really 5 or 10 years now, I think, but now it's gaining even more momentum, is, hey, what if we also invested in just the overall health and wellness of employees who are working in a company? Would they be more effective at their jobs, whether they're blue collar or white collar jobs, if they were physically healthier? And of course, we now see companies investing in like you said, physical exercise like Fitbit tracking or obesity prevention or smoking cessation,
Hmm.
or all kinds of things like that to get people physically healthier so they perform better on the job and are happier, healthier employees. And of course, now the next wave of this, which I think we're now starting to see, is well, hey, the body includes the brain, as well as investing in physical health, so to speak, below the neck. Shouldn't we also be investing in cognitive health, the part of the body that's above the neck? In fact, that's the part that probably is doing most of the work these days. And I think this Powerline study and a few others are starting to show the way forward on that, which is that, hey, if we had people working in all kinds of work who were sharper and faster from a cognitive perspective, would they do better work? And eventually, would they be happier and healthier? And I think the answer is, of course, turning out to be yes.
So you mentioned that the average person they can take tests and kind of see metrics about where they currently rate for things like, I'm sure, attention span and reflexes and sense of direction and things like that, and that is super important. But I kind of have this question that technology has been having effects on people. Just here on the show day to day, we have been going over the results, just finding news stories here and there that, they talk about the effects of social media, which, I'm sure that BrainHQ doesn't really tackle things like depression, but we're seeing things like, too much technology use can have an effect on, the younger generations, very, very adept at certain tasks, whereas, they lack in other faculties that, more traditional manual labor or even just, non-technology people really excel at. I mean, there's a give and take in everything. Do you think that with, just with people spending more and more time in front of the screen doing, like you said, kind of more maybe using their brains more than their bodies, do you think that there are societal trends that maybe need addressing now, and maybe that your product with BrainHQ can start to address those? And I'm sorry for being so vague, but I think just in general, we're going to start seeing trends that maybe people think that they're better multitaskers, but in reality, they're very horrible multitaskers because everything is designed to catch our attention and hold our attention and keep our attention. Maybe the ability to, receive multiple stimuli is reduced or something like that. My point is, there could be things in the future that we just need shoring up. And do you think that's where, maybe BrainHQ comes in for everyone?
I mean, I'd certainly agree with you that we all need to think about leading well-balanced lives that lead us to be healthy from a physical perspective, from a cognitive perspective, and from a mood perspective. When we think about BrainHQ training, if we're looking to have people do like physical exercise, do it 3 or 4 times a week for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, I hope we're not contributing significantly at that point to sort of the epidemic of screen time problems that we see. You can get a ton of benefit out of BrainHQ well before you hit the average number of hours per week that people spend on social media, for example. So I hope we're not contributing in the wrong direction on that front. But I do agree with your broader point. Brain plasticity is kind of a two-way street, right? The brain reorganizes in response to what we ask it to do. And with BrainHQ, we're trying to build exercises that build on that positively. With the exercises, we ask the brain to become faster and more accurate, and in doing so, we improve cognitive function. But people ask their brains to do all kinds of things, and it's worth asking, well, what are the consequences of asking our brains to do those kinds of things, right? So, one kind of narrow specific example, but that's kind of an interesting one is, hey, there's evidence that we're changing our eyesight because we spend so much time looking at screens that are very close to us. Essentially, the brain becomes adapted for this, close-up vision. And then as a result, our brains are less well adapted to see things that are far away. So we essentially are driving ourselves into a nearsighted state. And maybe that's a consequence of brain plasticity. The brain notices it's spending most of its time looking at screens very close to us. So the brain figures it should optimize itself for that, right? Well, what could go wrong? But then the consequence is we're out driving, for example, and we need to have far vision in order to see a sign, for example, that's far away, and the brain's no longer optimized for that. So that's a very narrow, tight example, but I hope you can kind of see what I mean by that. That the choices we make about how we engage our brains give us the brains we're going to end up in. A broader one that sometimes comes up is the use of navigational aids. We all use GPS now. We have it on our phone. I've lived in San Francisco for 25 years, and I certainly find myself using Google Maps to get around San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, it's fantastic, right? Google Maps has, taught me things about how to get around my own home city that I wouldn't have ever been clear on beforehand. But on the other hand, I think it's worth asking, well, whatever part of my brain that I used to use to find my way from point A to point B, maybe that's kind of atrophying, or those resources are being redeployed to something else. And is that something that I want or not? Does that have its own deleterious deleterious effects on me? And those are real and very reasonable questions to ask about how a changing society changes how our brains work.
Right. Yeah. And of course, I think for a lot of people, having those vague nebulous, is this having an effect on me? And of course, maybe it is having an effect on me, but how do I quantify that kind of thing? For those watching the video portion, I just did the bird spotting one where it's like one bird out of like a dozen has a different color, and then you have to the quicker it flashes, the you have to keep selecting the color bird out of a dozen different ones. And I don't know if 42 milliseconds is good. I'm going to say it's the best that anyone here at Computer America has done.
Good, actually. Nicely done.
Thank you. Yeah, but I mean, just like having that number 42 where now it says that you can repeat to try for another score.
Yep.
Which to improve. Do you find that people who use this, and either yourself within your own organization or just your users, is there a bit of like a competitive edge that people just like competing against themselves or others to improve?
And most of our users are definitely interested in competing against themselves, so to speak. What most people come to us is they want to see where they're starting, and they want to see that they're getting better at these exercises, and they want to understand how that improvement might connect to things that they're doing in the real world that they care about. And that makes sense, right? I think we are still in a world where people are they're a little bit nervous about sharing their cognitive function. It's a little bit like asking someone, in today's day and age, it's a little bit asking someone how much they weigh, right? That's not a question that you would probably have with a casual acquaintance, right?
Right.
We consider that to be a matter of our health, something a little bit private. And for that reason, most of our users, I think, they want to see where they start, and they want to see where they're getting better. That being said, we certainly see a segment of users that is, in fact, very performance oriented. And, typically these are users who are doing pretty well. And what they want to do is compare themselves to others to absolutely be at their best. And I get that, right? If you're nervous about your memory, maybe you don't want to share your memory score. But if you're the kind of person who can, memorize a deck of cards, well, you probably want to find other people who have pretty good memories.
So the Tom Brady's of the world, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly the segment we see. And from time to time over BrainHQ's history, we've run various kinds of competitions where for a month, for example, we'll have people compete on different exercises. And what we see is that absolutely attracts high-performing people. Absolutely, those people then want to share their scores with their friends, essentially to say, hey, I'm pretty good at this. Are you as good at this? Mm-hmm. And you get, you just get insight into that really interesting segment of users. And I hope what happens over time as our society grows and starts to just think about the brain more is that as we recognize that all of these abilities are trainable, that they're all plastic, that every single one of us can improve our cognitive function, that it starts to be something that people that people are comfortable talking about and are comfortable comparing with each other and are comfortable with sharing, because we don't treat it as an immutable aspect of our personality, but we treat it as something that, of course, we might want to work on and get better. That would be a nice change to start to see.
Yeah, we already see that in so many other areas of the body, and it goes back to kind of your idea that we don't see the brain as something that can be worked on. We have fitness competitions, we have intelligence competition, and by intelligence I mean like maybe general information like Jeopardy or something. But we have skillful competitions where, let's say, archery or something like that. We have so many different competitions that people can work on and practice practice and really refine their skills, maybe one day there's going to be I'm sure there might already be, let's say, a reaction competition where maybe like skeet shooting or something like that. But, competitions that really emphasize that these are skills that people have trained with, and hey, maybe if you try, you can too in the future. Looking at the questions here, there are, we talked about the power line worker study where people, were less likely to get into accidents and things like that, which is, of course, amazing just for, hey, don't get into accidents. That's a great thing. You have another one here about the tech worker study. Obviously, we're a tech show, so a lot of our audiences might be interested in this one. What is the tech worker study?
This was a great study led by some collaborators of ours at a company called Platypus Neuroscience. And, what they're doing is they're going to companies, very much as we talked about a moment ago, as an employee wellness benefit. And it's actually super cool because they show up at the company with a bunch of EEG headsets. So these are headsets that you wear that actually record your brain activity, as well as cognitive tests, and BrainHQ is a cognitive training program. And they measure cognitive performance and brain function, brain waves in a bunch of workers, and then offer them the opportunity to improve that cognitive performance through BrainHQ. And so what they did is they ran this study at Fujitsu, and they enrolled a bunch of white-collar, high-tech workers, right? People who work on computers all day long. And they're all pretty smart to start with, as you might imagine. And what they showed is that with a moderate amount of BrainHQ training, really on the order of 10 to 20 hours, that they could improve basic measures of what they called cognitive efficiency. So these were standardized neuropsychological measures, essentially, of how quickly and accurately the brain makes decisions. So that's cool, first of all, to show that in these workers that basic cognitive ability is then plastic. And then with the EEG brainwave recording, they actually showed in these people, hey, what's happening, what's changing in the brain that's associated with these cognitive performance changes. And they essentially showed that as people got better at these cognitive efficiency tasks, the brain fundamentally had to work less hard to do these tasks, which is to say the brain was becoming more efficient through training. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty neat model because, as you mentioned a moment ago, as we think about workplace wellness, we think about companies now offering Fitbits, and we think about companies now, offering ways for people to lose weight, for example, to become healthier. It kind of opens the mind to, hey, what is the workplace of the future going to look like? Is there a world where in a lot of jobs where, as well as those kinds of things, you might have the opportunity to see your own brain in action through EEG or some other kind of cool high-tech mechanism like that, and then be offered a program to improve your own brain efficiency and kind of track it, not only with computerized or behavioral measures, but also through, literally seeing what is the activity of your own brain as you do different tasks.
That, you say interesting. I think Amazon's already working on a way to wire their warehouse workers with that.
Well, all technology can be used for good or for bad. That is the nature of technology, isn't it?
Yeah. Seeing that, and of course, being able to see that level of productivity, and some people, may just say spying, but of course, it could be that. Maybe within an organization, something that isn't so nefarious, it could be that, we tested our employee as like as kind of like, as when employees first join the organization, we give them a test like this and we see that they are, really, really well suited for this kind of task. And then we're going to further train them to, better round them out to perform this task even better. Things like that. I could see a workplace of the future that, see someone, it doesn't just say, oh, you're perfect for the job because you have, because you're 6'2" and you can reach things. No, you're perfect for the job because, hey, you're a very well-rounded individual and you're going to be perfect for this. So,
well, you're exactly right. When we think about our dystopian nightmares, it's because technology like this turns into something that becomes a coercive tool of control that you can't escape from. Because you have a brain that works this way, the only job that you are suitable for is one particular kind of job.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, we've probably read 1,000 YA novels
Yeah.
for the past 10 years about how bad that is. And you know what? The YA novels are right. That is bad. We don't want our society to work like that. I'm an optimist about these kinds of things, and I'm an optimist because I believe in brain plasticity, and I believe that the way these technologies can be put to use is not to sort you into something that becomes your destiny, but rather to empower you to figure out, hey, what kind of brain do you have? What might you like to do with that? And then, hey, if you want to change your brain, well, here are the tools that help you change your brain so that you can succeed at exactly the things that you want to do. And so I think the way these things become utopian possibilities is by putting that power into the hands of individuals.
Yeah.
Rather than something that your company does to you, something that your company offers so that you can grow and change and become the kind of person that you want to be. So I hope I'm not
No.
I'm a hopeless utopian on this front, but that's certainly where I'd like to see this kind of technology go.
Yeah, and of course, for everyone out there who would like to go check out BrainHQ.com, you can see here that this is completely available to individuals. I did not want to keep driving the point home that this is only for organizations, but no, this is for the individual as well. And
probably worth me saying while you're at it that in fact anyone can sign up for free. And if you sign up for free, BrainHQ will give you an exercise every single day to kind of take you on a grand tour of all of the exercise or many of the exercises that are in there. And that's a great way to see if, hey, this is something you might like, or a great way to try it out and see if there's someone else in your life who you think might enjoy it.
Great thing to point out, and absolutely we highly recommend that. And yeah, of course, link in the show notes after the show. But I like the way that you put that this is for this is not to control people. It's for people to control something that maybe traditionally we thought we didn't have any control or very little control over ourselves. And it's very much reversing that, saying that, hey, you can change this, and you're giving the tools. And actually, speaking of those tools, you mentioned that you fiddled with at least internally. I think you said that kind of like high scores or competitive people who like to compare themselves with one another. You said that was an interesting insight into that sector of people. These tools over time. Obviously, BrainHQ, it's a service, it's a subscription. People are going to be, continuously, getting these exercises from BrainHQ. Are you further developing the exercises that you have? Are you changing it up? How do you think the exercises will change over time, or do you think, nope, we got it, this is the perfect way to train the brain, no further changes needed?
Man, I wish I had that confidence. And we could all go and just sit back and relax for quite some time. No, there's always a ton of work to be done. One thrust of work, of course, is around basic science. Are there ways that we can invent new exercises or better optimize these exercises to drive bigger changes faster that could be more long-lasting or drive even stronger benefits into real-world behavior? And that's always of interest. And in fact, in that area, are there new areas of cognitive function that we don't currently address that we should be training more strongly in the future? And so that's always of interest to us from an R&D perspective. But I would say our biggest interest right now is in the sense of getting this technology out into the world. What are the ways that we could be improving the program to give people more support, more direction, and even more kind of progress and feedback around how they're doing. When we talk to users who really sustain brain training over an extended period of time, it's because one way or the other they sort out an aspect of using BrainHQ that they find very motivating or very compelling. Some people just like to accumulate their stars, and as you're doing BrainHQ, you probably see you earn stars by doing exercises and performing well. Other people like to get on streaks where they train for 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 100 days in a row. And so those are the kinds of things that we often see people finding in BrainHQ that make training really compelling to them. And I think one of the biggest opportunities we have to grow BrainHQ is to build more and more of those kinds of hooks into it, so that people can find things that they love and find compelling and keep using about it. And when I look at where we are in the brain training world, I think that it's something that can help a huge number of people and has only touched a few people so far, to be honest, right? I imagine that 98% of people, if I even were an optimist, haven't yet started an active program of cognitive fitness for themselves. And I think that's the opportunity for us and others in this industry to grow in an evidence-based way, is to, make programs even more compelling, so we can reach more people and help more people. So I would say that's where a ton of our interest is. How can we help
And I'm
life better?
Yeah, and I'm completely with you on that, and that's why I was really looking forward to having you on the show, because a lot of that is awareness, and I think if people just actually heard about this kind of thing, they would be completely on board. And of course, hey, I did want to round out our whole interview here with one more study that you had here, which was police officers. So we've already talked about power line, tech workers, police officers. They have, some of the, one of the highest stake, highest, stress jobs out there, because everything is, very, very, split second judgment calls, and they have to rely on training that has to be just kind of ingrained in a person. And at the same time, you mentioned with, you mentioned with like the power line worker, yeah, you could do a lot of damage and a lot of money can be wasted, by making the wrong call, or you could injure yourself. With something like, let's say, a police officer, you could affect people, other than yourself. And in a lot of times, that can have very disastrous consequences, as we've seen on the news. Tell us about police officer studies. What were you looking at there, and what happened?
Yeah, this was really a fascinating study. It was led by a colleague of ours named Gary Lambert, who's got a long life experience working with and for law enforcement organizations around issues around training and safety again. And you outlined the problem exactly right there. So if we think about the worst case, most terrifying thing that can happen to a police officer, it's being out on the beat and finding yourself in a situation where someone that you've encountered may or may not be drawing a weapon on you for whatever reason might be happening. And, in the abstract, it's very easy to sit back and take all the time in the world to say, well, did you notice this? What shape was the thing that the person was holding? All these kinds of facts. But as you point out, in the real world, this is a decision with life or death consequences that has to be made in a matter of not seconds, but often hundreds of seconds. And of course, police officers train extensively for this. But the way they train, of course, is they practice different scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
The question that our collaborator Gary Lambert asked was, well, can we improve basic brain performance in these law enforcement officers? And if we did that, would they make better, which is to say more accurate decisions, even when they had to make those decisions very quickly? And so what he did is he took a group of law enforcement officers and he trained half of them with the BrainHQ exercises that train visual speed and attention and decision making. And then he trained the other half of them actually on different BrainHQ exercises, ones that emphasized more what you'd call slow cognition, as used like working memory. And then he sent them out onto a shooting range where they have a very real-world device. Essentially, you're standing a number of yards away from this machine, and it pops up a silhouette of a person. And the silhouette of the person is either holding a weapon, a handgun, or they're holding a cell phone. And those sound like they'd be dramatically different, but I've seen this. They're less different than you'd think.
Yeah.
And so then through a randomized performance, the cop each presentation has to very rapidly decide to shoot or to withhold shooting. And the results were just fantastic and amazing, because what they showed was that, hey, the police officers' basic accuracy didn't change, right? They hit the target the same number of times, the same kind of bullet spread and so forth. But what the brain training changed was that the officers who went through the speed, accuracy, decision-making exercises made better decisions, which is to say they withheld their shooting more frequently when they were supposed to withhold it, when the target popped up and was holding a cell phone rather than a gun. And what that suggested was that the brain training helped them process that information quickly, but crucially also accurately, and then crucially also helped their brain take the information that had processed and then rapidly make the right decision with it, which of course in that case was to withhold their fire when it needed to be done. So just a really, I mean, when they showed me the results, I got to tell you, I couldn't have been more surprised because, to see those kinds of changes occur in this very real world shooting simulation that we put together was just a wonderful demonstration that, hey, when we are in real world situations that make high demands of our speed and accuracy, fundamentally what limits us is in fact our brain performance and the experience that our brains have happened. And if we can reshape our brain performance and we can give our brains, better experiences to draw from, then we can improve real world performance like this. So, just a absolutely fascinating and riveting result, and we hope one that over time starts to have some real world implications of what we can do to help law enforcement officer training.
Yeah, and really no kidding. I mean, they go through so many, so many metrics, I'm sure, to kind of join the force already, that if they, let's say that they want to join the force, they have to meet certain metrics for a physical aptitude test. And maybe over time, maybe there will be a kind of like a mental acuity test. I know that they take they have training simulations and they do tests on paper to test that kind of thing. But maybe over time it becomes less of a, you didn't pass the test and more something, hey, we're going to put you on a regimen of, something like BrainHQ to bring up your scores, and we're going to train you to be better in these areas that we found weakness in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you want to join the police force, you're going to have to demonstrate a certain amount of physical fitness. But if you don't have it, they don't say, well, I guess you could never be a police officer. Too bad. They say, okay, well, why don't you practice? Why don't you work on running? Why don't you work on your push-ups? Why don't you get your body to the point where it's ready to become, to pass these tests required to be a police officer? And, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be doing the same thing with cognitive fitness. Again, as we talked about a moment ago, I would never want to see this used where, hey, if you got a score below X, you just can't be a police officer. It's just not for you.
Yeah.
That's a terrible way to go. But what I would love to see is, hey, if you get a cognitive score of lower than X, hey, here's a set of validated training exercises you can do to sharpen your brain in the ways that are relevant to this particular line of work. And once you've done that, come back, because we'd love to have you on the force and serving the population of your city and town. And I think that's a very real possibility for how these things are going to go. And in fact, outside of all this, we're currently working with the Italian Army, of all things. And the Italian Army is using these assessments to screen new recruits. They get about 60,000 people each year who want to join the Army. And as you might imagine, they have to do a certain number of push-ups and run a couple miles. And now one of the things they have to do is take some attention and working memory tests from us. And where the Italian Army is going with that is that for people who, over time, for people who don't pass that cutoff, they want to give them training and say, well, hey, come back when you have a brain that's been sped up and can balance more objects in working memory. Just in the same way that if you showed up and could only do 3 push-ups, they need you to do 20, they would say, well, hey, come back and here's how to practice some push-ups.
Yeah.
And again, I just think this speaks to so much of where we want to get to in society, which is to stop thinking of ourselves as having fixed physical or mental abilities that only suit us for one thing or another, and start thinking of ourselves as, continuous works in progress with both our body and our brains that can be reshaped to take us in the directions that we want to go. And
absolutely.
I think that's just a wonderful vision to have of what we can do with our lives.
So, and we have 2 minutes left, and honestly, most interviews typically last about 30 minutes. Doctor, I want to thank you so much for staying on. It's been a full hour, this is the entire show, so this has been going very, very well. But I wanted to get some very quick, kind of hard details out. Looking on your website here, $14 a month if you want to be billed monthly, $8 a month, so just under $100 if you want to be billed yearly. yearly. And then, of course, you have, promotions for the holidays and things like that going on. I highly recommend everyone go check those out. And I wanted to, so that's pricing. Another one is, how do you actually do this? Do you have a smartphone app? Do you have kind of like a web portal? What is the best way to get BrainHQ into your
All
life?
of the, as you'd expect in the year 2019. So you can go to the web to www.brainhq.com and sign up. You can also just go to the App Store on your Apple phone, your iPhone, or on an Android phone, and download the app and get going exactly the same way.
Perfect. And of course, you sign up with an account. You get those freebies if you like to give it a try, if you're unsure. And then, of course, subscribe just roughly, if someone were to subscribe, how many exercises, or what's a good metric to kind of say how much content there is for you?
Oh, yeah, there's about 29 different exercises, and then each exercise has dozens and dozens of different levels. So there's, many hundreds of brain training levels in there total. And then each level you don't do just once, you do it to, over a course of time to improve your performance on it. So there's really just a tremendous quantity of brain training content in there. And that may sound intimidating, but also quite helpfully, there's a personal trainer feature, so that when you subscribe as a full access member, when you log in each time, your personal trainer will look at your entire history of brain training performance, and it'll come up with exactly the right exercises and the right levels for you today. That you're likely to make the most improvement on. Perfect. And it's also worth saying that all of the exercises are adaptive. As soon as you start them, if you start to get the answers right, it'll get harder. If you get one wrong, it'll back off and get a little bit easier. So it rapidly sorts out to give you the right performance of whether you're a Super Bowl winning quarterback or maybe someone who's had some brain issues that need work on. So in that sense, it really can suit itself for just a huge spectrum of people who want to come improve their cognitive performance.
Perfect. So everyone, we've been talking to Dr. Mahncke. He is, of course, the CEO of Posit Science, and talking all about BrainHQ. And of course, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And maybe in a couple months, anything new, any new developments, we love to have you back on the show to talk about it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for a really thought-provoking set of questions and a great discussion.
Our pleasure. So until next time, everyone, that's it for Compute America. Have a great one. Thank you so much. We'll catch you here tomorrow. Everyone, have a good one. Bye-bye.